Professor Kingsley Moghalu, presidential candidate of the Young Progressives Party, YPP, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. From February, when I announced for the presidency, I have covered nearly 30 states in local town hall meetings with grassroots stakeholders, market women in Ibadan, traders in Lagos, artisans in Enugu, carpenters in Akure. I have covered in Kanu. I have engaged local women, youth, and Muslim clerics. So I have actually run a grassroots campaign. But in a campaign, you must target several audiences. If you are running with a transformational vision, as I am running for president, you need to speak to the poor woman in the village. You need to speak to young people in both rural areas and in the cities. You need to speak to artisans. You need to speak to the middle class. So I think I have actually run a far more grassroots campaign than many people realize. It will become very clear when the votes are counted in 2019. Because one of the things we suffer from in this election cycle is the burden of, perceptions that have been engraved in our psyche. And those perceptions have been engraved deliberately by politicians, old recycled politicians who want to intimidate us into believing that they are the only ones that have any influence over the grassroots because, of course, they're using money to induce people to sell their destiny. But some of us are reaching the same grassroots with a different message. And we're saying to the grassroots, is your life better off today than 3 years ago? Is your life better off today after 20 years of democracy than it was in the 1970s, for those old enough to have that experience? These are the questions we're asking people. When you consider that over 10 million people have lost their jobs since 2015, you find that the electorate is in many places. It's not just in the rural areas. The electorate is also in the urban areas, with millions of jobless young men and women. So all those old perceptions, things are changing. But the only people who don't know it are the old recycled politicians who are totally out of touch with the new realities on the ground. And the most important reality on the ground, which will shape the outcome of the 2019 election, is that Nigerians are tired of the status quo. They are tired of the old recycled politicians and recognize increasingly, unlike in 2015, that these politicians, whether they are of the APC, the fake change APC, or whether they are of the Bureau de Change PDP, none of these parties can take Nigeria to progress. In 2015, people thought it was anybody but Jonathan. And they saw now President Buhari as an alternative. Now they have tried Jonathan, the PDP. They've tried Buhari, also of the APC, and they have found out that the problem is that these two people and these two parties are actually the same thing. There's no difference in terms of the outcome for the common man. In fact, Nigeria not only needs to be restructured. Restructuring is one of my primary agendas because I recognize that without restructuring, without a constitutional restructuring of the Nigerian state, we are not going to be able to solve our problems at the depth at which those problems exist. It's one thing to come and make, surface solutions. It's another thing to solve the problem at its root. Nigeria is a diverse country. 200 million people, many religions, many ethnic groups. The best way to run such a country successfully and turn it into a real nation, which is my vision. My vision is to turn Nigeria from a country, which it is now, a broken country of divided, mutually antagonistic religions and ethnic groups, into a real nation with one national ambition, one national narrative, with the political identity of citizenship as the unifying factor of all these groups. And we need to focus our minds on what unites us, which should rise above the things that divide us. That's what I'm bringing. That's why we need a national ambition. Now, the best way to go about this is a constitutional restructuring that returns Nigeria to a proper federation. Nigeria is supposed to be a federal republic in name, but it is so only in name. In reality, this country is a unitary state and has been one since 1966, when the military guys came in and, really suspended the federal arrangements that we used to have. Now, every politician and his uncle, every politician and his mom and her mom now talk about restructuring. Nigerians are very easily deceived by fads. What is restructuring? What type of restructuring should we have, and why? And then how are we going to bring about that restructuring? I am the only presidential candidate who has laid out a comprehensive roadmap for restructuring. I did so at a recent lecture at the Nigerian Political Science Association's 6th annual conference, the Southeast Zone. I have made the argument for restructuring in this book. I am the only political candidate who's written a book with his vision for Nigeria in terms of leadership and governance, in terms of nation building, and in terms of economic transformation, and in terms of international diplomacy. It's all here. Build, innovate, and grow. Big. My vision for our country. So, my vision of restructuring is as follows. Number one, we need to return Nigeria to a proper federalism. And that means that we should not accept 419 outcomes. We need intellectual and conceptual clarity about certain things so that we are not deceived. Devolution of powers is not restructuring. It is a part of restructuring. It does not in itself create a real federation, because you can have devolution of powers in unitary systems of governance like the United Kingdom, where powers have been devolved, down to Wales, down to Scotland, but it's not a federal state. So that's the first thing we need to understand. We need to have a new constitution in Nigeria that is a people's constitution. That constitution needs to address what we call the national question. On what basis are we Nigerians? Are we Nigerians because of our ethnic nationalities, all 400 of them that are lumped together in the amalgamation of 1914? Or are we Nigerians because of what I call the political identity of citizenship? If we are only Nigerians because we are Yorubas, Igbos, Hausa, Fulani, and Tiv and Ijo who came together to form a country, but our defining sense of identity is our ethnic group, we can never build a nation. Many people who are calling for restructuring are calling for the national question to be answered on the basis of ethnic nationalities. I say no. I want to be very clear about my vision and how it is different from that of many politicians. The basis on which we should be Nigerians should be the political identity of citizenship, because that's what unites all of us, that we carry a green passport. That's it. So it doesn't matter whether you're Igbo, whether you're Yoruba, whether you're Hausa, but Nigeria, the fact that we are Nigerians is what unites us. So if you focus on that, it's unifying. If you focus on ethnic groups, it's divisive. So now the next item in my vision for restructuring is that Nigeria has to be constitutionally returned to a proper federation on the basis of the 6 geopolitical zones, not on the basis of states. I want to be clear that any restructuring of Nigeria that does not return Nigeria to regions or what we call today geopolitical zones, the reason it will fail is as follows. Many of the states in Nigeria today are not economically viable on their own. That is why they're all dependent on Abuja. Every month, they run to hold their hand out for oil rents. In the creation of states in Nigeria, it was not economics that was on the minds of people who were creating states, the military. It was the ethnic agitations. In every state, parts of the state will be agitating based on ethnic identity, that they deserve their own state. So, if you go down that way, there are 400 ethnic nationalities, and they all deserve to be states. Based on that logic, you can see that it's chaos. One day, you will want Kingsley Moghalu and his umunna, his larger family, will be demanding for their own state, and they will be justified. So we cannot go down this way. I say that we should restructure Nigeria on the basis of the 6 geopolitical zones as 6 regions. Why? Because each region in Nigeria today has what we call in economics, economies of scale. You can have a market based on manufacturing. Nigeria's government is unable to create jobs, is unable to create an enabling environment because of the economic incompetence of the government. So we have a lot of unemployment. We will invest in modern transportation of agricultural produce. We will invest in storage. So that becomes a business in itself. Then we will invest in processing of agricultural products. Then we'll invest in exports. So there's an agricultural value chain. Do you know how many millions of young men and women can be employed when agriculture, which is already a very big part of the GDP, but should not continue to be a big part of the GDP? Why? And that brings me to another aspect of the economy. Please, ladies and gentlemen, the secret of wealth and poverty of nations is based on understanding 2 things. The difference between economic growth, economic development, and economic transformation. That is one thing we must, and our politicians are not operating at this level. So they cannot serve you. But if you go to countries like Malaysia or Singapore or China, they understand what I'm saying. And that's why they're the way we are, and our politicians steal our money and go and buy houses in those places. But because I understand this, I will use this understanding as president of Nigeria to create wealth in this country. Do you see the EPRG, where they tell you that the target is 7% growth by 2020, which of course you and I know is a pipe dream? Economic growth does not in and of itself address issues of poverty. The economy can be growing, but the growth may not be inclusive. The growth may not be creating jobs. That's the type of economic growth we have in Nigeria. It doesn't create jobs. Therefore, it's not inclusive growth. The productivity of labor is not high because we don't have electricity and we don't have skills. So, number 2, you now talk about economic development, which deals with quality of life. Taking people out of poverty into the middle class. That will be the focus of my government. Economic development. The second and the third. The third, the economic development deals with things like life expectancy. Our life expectancy in Nigeria is 52 years. In most countries, it should be about 70 years, right? Now, questions of healthcare. We don't have good healthcare. Educational systems, we don't have those. That's what you call economic development, when you begin to have good systems of health, education, and so on. Then you have economic transformation. Economic transformation is when the structure of the economy has shifted from subsistence agriculture or just relying on natural resources like crude oil and has moved into industrial production as the mainstay of the economy. So the ratio of manufacturing to the GDP rises. In Nigeria, that ratio is not more than about 10, 11%. In Malaysia, it's 40%. So it is when you begin to move the ratio of manufacturing to GDP northwards, that's when you know you're moving into economic transformation. When you have human capital development, that's what guarantees economic transformation. Human capital development is a good educational system and skills. So these are some of my thoughts on job creation, the economy more broadly. We cannot reform Nigeria's economy without understanding economic philosophy. Let us be very clear. I'm very clear in my mind about the minimum wage issue. I just don't want to be populist about it. So nobody put me on the spot. Some people may just want to, cheap popularity. That's a different thing. And you can be making suggestions that are not sustainable. The minimum wage we have in Nigeria today of 18,000 naira is a poverty wage, and it's a criminal wage as far as I'm concerned. Right? Good. I believe the minimum wage should be doubled at the present time to about 36,000 naira. And I believe that the Nigerian economy can carry it. Because if you take it beyond 40,000 naira, the economy cannot sustain a wage above 40,000 naira. That is the truth. Now, and the second big problem is that you would then create massive inflation in the Nigerian economy if you just shoot up the minimum wage to 50, 60, 70,000, 80, or even, some people may say 100,000. But that's, you will be really creating more economic problems than you will be solving. So that's my baseline position on the minimum wage. I call upon the government of Nigeria to agree to a minimum wage of not less than 30,000 naira, which the labor unions are protesting, and I stand with labor on the minimum wage. Let me be very clear. The reason why it is difficult for Nigeria's governments to pay a minimum wage of 30,000, absolutely a massive corruption is what is preventing them from being able to pay a minimum wage of 30,000 naira. Why do I say this? First, I want to say that when I become president, the minimum wage increase I would like to see will be funded by savings in a number of areas. Number one, my government will abolish petroleum subsidy. I want you to be wary who is making populist promises to you about petroleum subsidy. Petroleum subsidy cost this government and most governments for the past several years about 1 trillion naira a year. It is a waste of money because petroleum subsidy favors the rich, not the poor. Who are the people who benefit from petroleum subsidy? It is the people, the big men and women with their SUVs, with their Jeep, with their Prado. How many poor people on their bicycle in the village benefit from petroleum subsidy? On top of it, the Buhari administration increased the pump price of petroleum about 60-something%, thereby complicating the hardship on the poor. Now, when you abolish petroleum subsidy, you save the money, but we will also deregulate the downstream petroleum sector. The government will have nothing to do with it. Private people, we will encourage petroleum refining in Nigeria. If people are not able to set up petroleum refineries and they import petroleum, the government will not interfere with the price. And let me tell you what will happen. As many people get into this business and are competing, the prices will naturally begin to fall. This is economics 101. So that's my view about the subsidy. Now, the minimum wage. But the reason why a lot of our politicians don't want to agree to a minimum wage of 30,000 is because they're stealing our money in security votes, in the award of massively inflated contracts, in all sorts of diversionary schemes, like you saw with the Nigerian Liquefied Natural Gas. The government of President Buhari has been illegally and corruptly proceeds from that company into the wrong purposes to maintain petroleum subsidy and pretend that they're helping the poor. So this is the problem. I am running for president because I am sick and tired of being sick and tired of what's happening in Nigeria. Let's just call a spade a spade. I can go and enjoy my life. I'm a professor. I'm a former deputy central bank governor. I'm a former United Nations official. I can be selfish and enjoy my private and personal success. I have chosen not to be selfish. I've chosen to bring myself out sacrificially on behalf of the Nigerian people to say, look, God has blessed me with a lot of knowledge. God has blessed me with a lot of experience. God has blessed me with a lot of contacts around the world. Why can't I make use of this to serve our people where I think I can make the most impact? which is the presidency. I want to tell you something. If when I'm elected the Nigerian president, as from 2019, 4 years after, this country will not be the Nigeria you used to know. There is no way that all these vision that I have for Nigeria, that we will not implement, if not 100% of it, 70% of it, 80% of it. If we do that, this country will change fundamentally. It will not become heaven on earth. I don't want to sound as if I'm making unrealistic promises, because these are problems of 60 years, decades. You can't solve them in 4 years, but you can begin to make a lot of progress towards the solution. Do you think I like it when I come out and people are mobbing you, asking you for money for transport, people are feeding from the garbage? When I look at these things, it breaks my heart. Why am I a citizen of a country that is like this? So I go abroad around the world, I'm celebrated because I'm an individual. But who is celebrating my country? I'm proud of Nigeria. I am a Nigerian. I love my country. I want my country to be celebrated by its own citizens and to be celebrated in the world. That's why I'm running for president. There are 2 reasons why electricity has defied, our electricity problems have defied solution. One is corruption. The generator mafia in Nigeria has become a multi-billion naira business. They have a stake in keeping us in darkness. And you will be surprised at some of the politicians who are trying to be your president today, who are heavily invested in the generator business. Enough said. The point I'm trying to make to you is that when I become president in 2019, my approach to electricity will be as follows. All the hydroelectric power in Nigeria will be shifted to industrial zones. They will go to, that electricity will go to Kano, will go to Port Harcourt, to go to Lagos, to go to Onitsha and Nnewi, to go to Aba. Why is this important? Because the cost of production should be brought down. When these manufacturing firms or productive centers have 24-hour electricity, you'll be surprised that most goods that come from them into the marketplace, their prices will drop. That's number one. So the citizens will have relief because the price of electricity in everything produced in Nigeria is at least 40%. So number two, we must now move for the average citizen for residential homes and office spaces and all that towards renewable energy. I will take Nigeria into the renewable energy age. The reason is this. Number one, it's the future. It will ultimately be cheaper than hydroelectric or coal or those types of things. Secondly, it is faster because our electricity deficit cannot wait for another 5, 6, 7 years. All these dams and, massive constructions, they take years. We can be doing that, but we must have renewable electricity for ordinary consumers in Nigeria. So we must create a market for renewable energy. And after some time, the price will begin to crash because everybody will be using it. And that will give you electricity quickly, cheaply. This is my vision for electricity. So we cannot be 200 million people with 4,000 megawatts of electricity for the past 20 years. South Africa is 50 million people. They have 40,000 megawatts of electricity. Brazil is 210 million people. They have 120,000 megawatts of electricity. When I tell you that Nigeria is a failed state, I know what I'm saying. People can pretend otherwise. And on top of all of this, when we're looking at the economy, Nigeria's government today is taking us into debt slavery. They're borrowing every year. They're like the irresponsible man who cannot think about how to sustain himself and his family. Every day, he looks for what to borrow, and when he finishes borrowing, he will look for his thing to sell. So he's busy borrowing. He cannot pay what he's borrowing because he's over-leveraged. Then, when he becomes over-leveraged, he begins to look for his piece of land or his property to sell. That's what the Nigerian government is doing today. They're over-borrowing and we're spending over 60% of all our revenue servicing debt. So there's no money left for development. That's number one. Number two, they are now so desperate that they're beginning to think about how to sell our national assets to fund a budget, 80% of which will go to paying salaries. Please tell me what other definition of madness exists in your dictionary. So, these are the kinds of people who are asking you to vote for them to come back to power in 2019. Nigeria is in a real problem, but I believe that the people of Nigeria will listen to the message that I and the Young Progressives Party are putting out to them, that the 2019 elections are not just elections. 2019 is an existential choice. 2019 is a choice between the past and the future. It's a choice between progress and retrogression. It's a choice between poverty and prosperity. It's a choice between security and insecurity. It's much more than an election. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to the Kingsley Moghalu presidency from May 29, 2019.